First of all, I'd like to welcome a few new subscribers, so thanks very much for joining me if you have recently subscribed. Hopefully we can carry this on, get a few more people on board as well. I thought I'd carry on the D&D theme. Now in my last video I gave a few tips on DMing in general. I'll put a link for that in the description below so you can check that out if you haven't seen it already. Today I'd like to go over a few more specific tips for preparing your first session of the Dungeons & Dragons starter set adventure, the Lost Mines of Phandelver. This was the first adventure that I ran when I started DMing 5th edition D&D. It's pretty cool, to be honest. There's some cool characters in there, there's some cool dungeons to explore, plenty of opportunity for role-playing and interesting encounters. So as I said in the first video, part 1 of the adventure is really as far as you're going to get in your first session. So that's all I would recommend reading. Maybe read the whole first chapter of the adventure and then the first few pages of chapter 2. I'll explain why that's important later on. Don't bother trying to memorize anything because you'll need to have the books in front of you when you play, but it's helpful for you to have read it so you at least know what's going to be happening or what's supposed to be happening next. Similarly, the rulebook is a lot to read all in one go. As I said previously, treat it like a reference book. So fill it with post-it notes, just make sure you know that when you're at the table you can flick to the right page and find the rule that you're looking for. I obviously can't go into detail on every rule that's in the rulebook, every room in the adventure. I am happy to answer specific questions on specific encounters if you like, just leave me a comment. Send me a tweet. So as far as setting up the table, there's a few bits of equipment you're going to need. You're going to need at least one set of dice. The starter set does come with a set of dice. You're going to need character sheets for the characters, plenty of notebooks or note paper for both you and the players, and just as many pencils as you can get your hands on. That is all you truly need to start a game. Now a DM screen is optional, but it can be really useful. There's a lot of good reasons to have a DM screen that don't necessarily have anything to do with what's written on the screen. Having the DM screen means that you can hide dice rolls from your players. It means that they don't necessarily see the notes that you've made or the plan of the adventure that you've got laid out in the book, and they certainly won't be seeing the maps that are laid out. So if you can create something, whether it's just a wall of books, maybe a piece of folded card, just something to separate your side of the table from theirs, it adds to the psychology of the game. And while you've got it there, you may as well stick a few notes up on the inside. Hey look, you've made yourself a DM screen. The starter adventure does come with maps printed in the books. They are very small. It's hard to hide certain parts of them from your players, and even just showing them the book means they might catch a glimpse of something in the words that they maybe shouldn't see. So what I would suggest instead is that you find some maps online. Now I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but Mike Schley, I think that's right, is the artist who drew all the maps for the Lost Mine of Phandelver, and in fact a lot of other D&D adventures. He sells high-resolution copies of these maps for, I think he sells the whole set for $10 on his website, so that's probably a fairly good investment. If you don't want to spend that money or you haven't got that available, there are free versions that others have come up with. And again, I'll put links to all of this in the description below for you to check out. As far as making use of the maps, personally I think it's really, really useful to have a map of the area that the players are exploring for them to look at and use. I wouldn't give them the whole map, and I wouldn't reveal areas to them that the characters haven't seen yet. So that means you either need to have the map printed, and then have pieces of paper or pieces of card that you use to hide rooms they haven't explored. If you're using an online system like Roll20 or something like that, that comes with a built-in like a wall of fog system, so you can use that to hide areas of the map. Or you can go old school with it, give them a set of squared graph paper and let them draw their own map. This can be a really good way of getting the players invested in the game, and it makes things feel real in a way that maybe printed maps don't. But it's up to you how you'd like to do it. Obviously that's not quite as appropriate if you're playing online. Now if there's anything that confuses you as far as game settings or rules or anything like that, combat in particular, there's nothing wrong with practicing. I actually found that I was a little confused about how to run the first combat encounter when I began preparing for the Lost Mines of Phandelver. So I actually sat one afternoon by myself at a table and I played that first combat encounter by myself. I played characters on one side, the goblins on the other, and I did the whole thing. So what I've actually done is I've created a second video, an addendum to this, and in that I run a really quick combat encounter, just 2 players, 2 goblins, have a little fight, just to show you how a combat encounter looks and how I practiced, at least for when I was beginning. I'll leave a link for that video in the description, so check it out if you think that's going to be useful. So as I said, I can't go through every room in detail, but as the players start to explore the Cragmore hideout, they're going to start coming up with things that are not necessarily in the book, solutions to problems that weren't anticipated by the writers. And before you start playing, it might be useful for you to try and preempt some of these scenarios. So don't forget, you know your players far better than I do, certainly far better than the writers of the adventure do. So try and think about what they might do in certain situations. Can't go through everything, but I'll give you an example, the kind of thing I mean. So in section 4, there's the Western Passage. It's described as being choked with rubble with steep escarpments. Now there's no particular rules given for if the players try and climb this, but they might. And in fact, in the first game I ever played of D&D, as a player, we tried to climb this. Now it does say that anything that weighs more than 100 pounds is going to loosen the rock and is going to drop that down. So that basically means anyone but a halfling or a gnome is very likely to set this off. So you could end up in a situation where a halfling or a gnome climbs up there, the rest of the players are stuck down the bottom. It doesn't necessarily give a difficulty for a roll in terms of climbing up this. What I would say is make it a strength check and use the same rules as are given in section 3 in the kennel. There is a chimney that is described heading to the east, and it asks for a DC 10 strength check to climb up that. Characters will be climbing up at half speed, so bear in mind if it's a 30-foot climb, which we'll assume it is, they will need to do at least 2 strength checks. Character speed is 30 feet, they'll be going at 15 feet. If their speed is less than that, then they'll need to do 3 strength checks. Each will need to be successful to climb this. So that does make it quite difficult, and you as the DM want it to be difficult because actually the adventure flows much better if they travel the other direction. But if they do that, you've got to be prepared to go with it. Bear in mind as well that any failure to climb this Western Passage is likely to make quite a noise as the debris comes down, crushing players, causing damage to them. And that noise is almost definitely going to alert the goblin that's watching from the top of the bridge. Having consequences to your players' actions, especially such organic ones like that, will really make the world feel alive to them. So if you can just think that next step along, what would the consequences of success or failure be? That will really help your game. So that's an example of just one possible thing that the players could do to mess with the adventure a little bit, to try and change the order of things. You will not be able to predict everything that they could possibly do, but even the act of trying to predict that is likely to give you some kind of indication as to how the players might proceed, and it's going to just strengthen those improvisation muscles ever so slightly. So when something does come up that you haven't prepared for, you've got something to fall back on. You've got some idea of what you could do to keep the game going. And then we come to the topic of role-playing. Now, at some point, players are likely to encounter Sildar Hallwinter. He's the first friendly NPC the players will have met, and he actually is in a bit of trouble. He is in a situation where he's very likely to be knocked unconscious at the beginning of any combat encounter. So unless the players do something very out of the box, it's very likely that the goblin leader is going to, as is described in the book, push Sildar off a ledge. He's going to take 1 or more damage, which will knock him to 0 hit points, and he will start bleeding out. You as the DM don't really want Sildar to die because he's a useful NPC, he's got a lot of information, and he can lead them into some quests in the future. So try your best to keep him alive. Now, you can't do that overtly, but you can describe clearly Sildar's lying on the floor. He's not dead. He's bleeding out. You can see maybe spluttering breath. You can see that the life is starting to drain from his body. Give the players every indication possible that there's probably something they can do. What they need to do is run over to him, try and stabilize him, which they can do using a medicine check. The difficulty for that is a DC 10. So probably they will succeed in stabilizing Sildar. If they don't succeed on the first turn, start rolling death saving throws for him. So roll a d20, 10 or more is a success, anything less is a failure. and just make it clear that there are plenty of opportunities to save Sildar. When it comes to role-playing Sildar, there's a few things to bear in mind. Now, he is described as being a kind-hearted human male. He's a fighter. He's a member of the Griffin Cavalry at Waterdeep. Now, that's going to give him a certain gravitas, even in an injured state. It helps, I think, to imagine what he might look like. For me, he looks like Jorah Mormont from Game of Thrones. It's important, I think, to come up with a character for Sildar, a voice. Sildar, for me, is quite a careful man. He's experienced, he's a little older, he knows his way around the sword. And it's for that reason that his voice is just a little deeper than mine. Now, I don't expect you to be an actor, of course not. If you are, fantastic. But just try and add a touch of character. It will draw your players into the roleplay just a little bit more. The advantage of a slow speech pattern for a character, particularly your first roleplay character, is that that gap between words, that gap between sentences, gives you plenty of time to think about what's the next thing he's going to say. Sildar is a really useful character for the story. He does, if you follow the book letter by letter, drop a bit of a lore dump on the players, and this is something I would prepare for in advance. He drops them a lot of information about the Wave Echo Cave and the battles that went on there before, and it's a lot. It's a lot to read out. It's certainly a lot to do in a voice, if you are going to do a voice. So this is something I would maybe have printed or written down that you can hand out to the players, or maybe emailed to them after the session, just because for me it makes Sildar seem less like a kind of gruff, grizzled veteran of war and a bit more like a sort of a dozy librarian. I'm just not into that. The rest of the information that he gives them, so he gives them a lot about where Gundren might be, what work he's been doing with the Rockseeker brothers. This I would let the players draw out through conversation. Don't just sit there and say, Sildar says, oh, Gundren did this, and Nundro did this, and no. That's really dull. Let the players ask Sildar questions, let him prompt them to ask questions, let him give them information. Make sure all the information comes out, and if there's anything that your players don't ask, you need to make sure that you're finding some way to provide that. But role play that interaction, because that'll add character to Sildar. You can do that either in the cavern, that can happen on the way out of the cavern, that can even happen in town once you've made it. Now let's talk contingencies. Literally nothing in Dungeons & Dragons will go as planned. I promise you that. I have had entire D&D sessions where I've had pages and pages of notes that I've written, and I haven't even looked at them once for the entire session because the first thing the players did was go off and do something completely different. If you want something a bit more improvisational, that's fine, and actually for that session of that game, that was cool, we had a great time. For this, for your first session, you need ways to bring it back on track, so a little bit of time spent thinking and making notes about those things before the game starts is going to do you wonders. First of all, players might decide to go to Phandelver before exploring the cave. The book does make mention of this, particularly if they get injured in that initial fight. They might decide we need to go, rest, heal up, and come back in force. First thing I would do is point out to them, you can rest here. I wouldn't necessarily encourage them to rest if they're not already discussing it, but just having them go all the way to Phandelver, all the way back again, is a bit boring. So keep the action going, suggest to them as the DM, you can rest here, and for this rest, I wouldn't bother trying to roll any kind of random encounters. Just let them rest. Let them enter the Cragmore hideout at full strength, because that'll be a lot more fun for them. And in the first session, you really want to sort of drive home. D&D is fun. They may alternatively decide to go to Phandelver anyway. They may decide to go there even if they don't need rest, because maybe they want to purchase some new equipment. Maybe they want to go and find help. There's lots of reasons they might decide to do that. This is why I suggested at the beginning of the video that you read the first couple of pages of Chapter 2, which describes Phandelver, because there's a few hooks in there you can use to turn those players around and get them back to the cavern, the thing that you've planned, the thing you've prepared for. So the character that they're due to meet in Phandelver is Elmar Barthen, the owner of Barthen's Provisions. He is the one that's meant to be paying them when they drop off these mining supplies that they're carrying. So let him pay them if they arrive, but let him be worried Where's Gundren? Where's Sildar? We need to find them. Let him point out the fact that there have been goblin raiders in the area. Make it really clear. You probably should go back to that cave. It's very possible, and indeed almost a guarantee, that at some point your players are going to try and take a prisoner. This is something that almost definitely happens in every D&D game at some point, and it's a lot of fun if you do it correctly. So think about how you can use the skills of the players to make this a role-playing challenge. The prisoner shouldn't just immediately do everything the players want. Make them complete an intimidation check, maybe a persuasion check. Maybe they're offering to pay the goblin that they capture, or maybe they're threatening to break his kneecaps. Whatever they do, think of a difficulty. Don't make it too high because it's fun to have a prisoner, but make them roll a dice, make them think that there's a chance that this won't work. And you can base that difficulty, if you like, on what's happened previously. So if the players have just come in, slaughtered all but one goblin in the room, and taken him prisoner immediately, they're probably not going to need to roll that high on an intimidation check to get something out of that goblin. The last thing that I've thought of just off the top of my head is that Sildar might die. Despite your best efforts, despite every hint you've given the players, they might let him die. First of all, don't panic. Nobody is essential in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, not even your player characters, and there are plenty of other ways to get the same quests, the same information across. It means they won't get that initial lore dump, and it means they won't get certain information about the Rockseeker brothers and what they've been up to, but that's okay, you can give that information to them another way. So these are just a few things that I thought about when I was planning my first session of the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and hopefully this has been useful to you as well. Now I know I can't cover everything because this video would be hours long. If there is anything you do want covered in more detail, please let me know. As I said, leave me a comment, send me a tweet. I'd love to know if you enjoyed the video. If you did, give me a thumbs up, and if you want to see more D&D content coming soon, hit the subscribe button. Until the next video though, thank you very much, and I'll see you later.